Hi, this is the Chief Architect Forum, and today my guest is Lisa Pratico, former Vice President of Global Architecture for Hewlett Packard and the current member of the Chief Architecture Forum Board and the leader and likely chair for the Sustainability Group. Lisa, welcome on board. It's a pleasure to talk to you today.
Same here. Same here.
So let's get right into it, Lisa. When we talk about sustainability, one of the things that comes to my mind, and I saw your article on CIO.com, where you talk in a more general sense about responsibility and enterprise architecture being responsible. And I'm kind of like, what? You mean I've been irresponsible up to now as an enterprise architect?
Yeah, so for me, I think the competency has always been more looking at the entire estate, right? And planning out that navigational path to your horizon. And so I think as technologies have matured and become more complex, architecture itself has had to build out more disciplines, more focus on security at the front door, right? More focus on risk and compliance. And I think now with sustainability as a key set of measurements, right? Our purview on what we're responsible definitely has expanded across those factions. And I think even some of the principles we're now defining in sustainablearchitectures.com align with some of the harder intangibles, right, that the UN is setting regarding ethical usage, right, and availability. So I don't think it's different than what we've always been doing, Brice, but I think it's another overlay of how to design to accommodate ensuring we're not wreaking havoc on our gas house emissions reporting,
Yep.
and improving, hey, based on what we found, here's what we can do to migrate or move and focus more on sustainability as we mature our existing ecosystem, or more importantly, how we're designing net new products, right? But with a focus on how to address e-waste, how to deploy so that it's still scalable and flexible and reliable, but the resource utilization comes into play. And definitely with AI, it's both a positive and a negative contributor to anybody meeting their ESG mandates right now.
And I mean, this is an interesting point. So the United Nations has some ESG ethical guidelines, and I'm sort of assuming that at some level, a company at the governance wants to take these and build a framework around them, and then they want to start reporting that they're doing great, and they're doing like they're just going gangbusters. They're cutting down carbon. What could go wrong with that picture?
Yeah, so I will say there are a lot, all of a sudden sustainability is the new buzzword, right? I think it was cloud for a while and then it was digital and now it's sustainable. So there are a lot of organizations that are themselves building out tools and solutions tied to an ever-growing ecosystem footprint like SAP, like ServiceNow. And then there are the big consulting firms saying, hey, we can now offer this. We can help by running analytics. A lot of people, refer to it as green ops, right?
Yep.
And then actually you can, pay us as a consulting firm to come in and lay out the program and how, based on the findings of your carbon and your energy and water consumption, information, right? We'll put a plan together on how you can reduce that and then report out your metrics year over year. And KPMG is, in there, and EY has something on it. And if you go to Accenture, there's a lot on their website on it. So I think one of the challenges with that, though, is that, and hopefully I'm not going to offend anybody on the podcast, I think architecture started to get shortcutted in digital innovation, and some of our key solution and design principles around focusing on master data and informational data and what you need when kind of went out the window with, hey, everybody wants all data, right? And that spiked your carbon and your electricity consumption. The problem is, to this date, a lot of monitoring tools provided, you know, literally are greenwashing. And by
Yeah.
greenwashing, I, mean it's a company making false or misleading or inaccurate claims on
So does this
sustainability.
greenwashing, does it start like with the company, like at the executive level, making a decision to greenwash, or does it start lower down the stack, like at the architecture, or even at a lower level?
I think it's at the lower level ops, right? Because we are in the cloud environment, and there are some emerging companies. Green Pixie is one that our community is investigating, that
Yep.
goes into provider-based usage, sustainable data on hyperscaler clouds and AWS and Azure. The fear of it, though, is you are deploying into containers into multiple regions and multiple zones, right? And is that information on your energy usage, right, a blend with others sharing that tenancy, or is it truly your own? And so I think that's why we're starting to see emerging software vendors like Green Pixie come up
Yep.
saying, hey, we can fine tune that for you. I also think sustainability is still relatively new, right? And for CIOs, I do feel bad for them because they do have to lead the charge on environmental sustainability tied to their own IT, then tied to IT for the enterprise, and then IT for an industry or sector. Um, how do you use that data to then say what you need to do? And there's a cost to that. There's a
So
large
Lisa,
cost.
what does this data look like when I report up my, like, what do I look for in green numbers? Like, as a company, do I start reporting my pounds of carbon that I put out, or do I talk about teraflops or, wattage of use? What's the right way to talk about
Yeah,
sustainability?
I think the tools are all over the board on that, right? What I can tell you is that, sustainability in IT is now looking at data center and cloud compute numbers, right? They're looking at what it means to do software development. And there are companies out there, and the Green Software Foundation is one, right? That's saying, hey, you could build you could write your code this way, or you could write your code with more of a sustainable lens to it by executing your code a different way. Circular IT economy plays into it, Brice, right? People are now, there's a bunch of vendors looking at hardware, right? And literally the cost of that hardware, and then is there an opportunity to reuse those components versus the e-waste, um, which by the way in 2021 was 57 megatons, which was heavier than the Great Wall of China, right? So your hardware e-waste is also a big problem nowadays. And I think it depends on the tool and what the tool is building for analytics. That then is your jump off point to, all right, now what does it mean to the IT organization? And for a lot of us kind of really tied to this community, it's the CIO should be glued to enterprise architecture and the architecture competencies to be up front in, if you're doing tech modernization, how do you do it smarter with sustainability focus? If you're doing app rationalization, what does that mean to your vendors you're working with, and are they sustainably compliant? So there's some overlays once again with how architecture's always worked to now add sustainability into it.
Now, one thing that you've talked about in your article that I really like is you're not an opponent of AI. So some people have talked about AI and the huge amount of energy it's going to generate, and but there's a flip side to that. It can provide benefits, and you're, I think, more of a champion of using AI judiciously. Tell us about your view on that.
Yeah, there's a whole different track that is part of sustainablearchitectures.org tied to responsible AI. And we're working with sustainableIT.org on defining those responsible AI pillars. But they very much still map into either extending sustainable principles in an EA principle, guideline deck, or stand on their own. And so I am a proponent of it, but I'm a proponent in using it when there's sound business cases and a sound return on investment. I will say that the reason I got into this was I went to a Harvard University event that sustainableIT.org invited me to. And I don't think people understand the impacts of using AI for everything everywhere, right? The amount of water consumption, right? And the energy that everybody wants large language models and they want all data, right? I think once again, going back to architecture principles, it's knowing your master data and your informational data and kind of building smaller models, knowing the authoritative source for that data and getting really tangible AI results from it, right? But I think when people are just running it everywhere, it actually is impacting carbon emissions and at large cloud vendors right now, and it's eroding what they set as their measurements because of the power consumption, the water cooling consumption, right? And just kind of the impacts of applying it everywhere to everything.
Can you folk tell us a little bit more about greenwashing? And to me, this is companies that are saying, look at, we're angels, and meanwhile they're maybe not angels or a little bit short. Is it intentional? Is it a lack of understanding the metrics, a bit of both, or is there something else there?
I think it's a bit of both, and I think it's how numbers are being captured. So Zippia put out a report November of 23, right? That 68% of US executives admit their companies are guilty of greenwashing. And that 42% of corporate environmental claims made online are likely deceptive or false, right? So I think most organizations now have very good mission statements tied to sustainability, and even some tied to responsible AI. It's what they're doing to actually prove they're building for that, right? And that the metrics for carbon emissions are going down versus up is, I think, where the gap is. But I think people came out running because it does affect, the Gen Z population, right? They're very focused on trusting brands that say, hey, we're really want to save the earth, right? And we're doing a lot more harm than good. It also impacts funding, right? Funding for green. There's a subset of investment funding out there. And so I think people jumped on, hey, here's what we're doing. But I also think there's going to be an issue when it comes to reporting that, it's reporting like your socks, right? The UN has some clear tenets. And I think that's when people are going to go, uh-oh, we may not really be ready for it. I know KPMG did a survey in September of 23, and 75% of the companies are unprepared for the reporting metrics, right? And proof that they're doing something on it, similar to SOX controls.
Okay, that's interesting. So, and I mean, this isn't just focused exclusively on carbon either, right? One of the statements you made was around supply chain resilience.
Yes.
This is maybe a little bit off topic, but I want to get your thoughts. There's this, sort of this trade war thing starting with China right now, where they're saying, "Oh, you're not going to give us those chips. Well, we're not going to give you the antimony. We're not going to give you the precious minerals you need," and possible supply chain disruption. And to me, this almost plays perfectly the scarce resource thing into the does it?
It may, right? I would go back to just with the new chipsets, right? It is very expensive, scarce minerals that we're using. So once again, I think for myself, on any of these programs, it has to start with education and getting people to understand here's what's going on in the world, right? To run AI, to have these like huge data centers that are now looking at different alternative energy models because they're running out of energy, even nuclear, right?
Yep.
And then saying, all right, what impact does that have on the earth, right? And then I do think kind of what's happening with tariffs that potentially are going to happen are going to make the availability of a lot of the chipsets, right? Kind of almost like we experienced in COVID, right? When you bought a new car and they said, "Hey, sorry, but your chipset's not going to be here for a year, but you can have your car." So I do worry about it a bit, but for me, it's more, um, are people aware of those very precious metals, right, that are needed to now build out the TPUs and the GPUs and the impact that has on the earth, right? I
Yes.
started all this because I balance my passion for technology with just when I need to chill, I'm always outside, right? And I think the earth, it's going to be 60 degrees here tomorrow, Brice. I live in Boston. It should not be 60 degrees in the middle of December, living in New England. And so I think it becomes education on, hey, here are modern technologies and here's how they're being used and here's the cons to the use if you use them the right way, right? And I do think AI can help definitely, with climate change, especially in agriculture, right? And looking at climate trends and understanding what that means to soil temperatures and et cetera. Um, but you need to know the appropriate usage of it. And I think that's where an architecture discipline is the linchpin, right? Because our kind of core value has always been, hey, I'm going to assess the existing estate and give
Yeah.
you viable options that align with the business goals, with your risk and compliance, now with your sustainability measures, and be able to provide metrics on that inform a CIO, right, of appropriate directions to make on literally they own a lot of this tech footprint, right? And it
Yeah.
can cause a lot of amazing positive good, but it can also cause harm moving forward.
That's a great point. And there's, I think, two things I want to touch on. The first is when you talked about different chipsets, I just want to get your reaction. There was a recent announcement by Microsoft that they made Windows 11. You may or may not have followed this, but it was dependent on the TPM platform chip version 2. And now they said, guess what? Windows 11 won't depend on it, which means we can now recycle and possibly refurbish all of that stuff. And I wonder if some of their thoughts have been pressured by the green movement to do something like that.
I don't know. I mean, I think the value in getting organizations that, and you know this, Brice, from your background, right? Architects are always kind of between a rock and a hard place, right? Because there's a force of doing digital. You at large companies, you have a massive amount of brownfield, right? That the care and feeding to say you're N-2 and compliant is not there. And the business is the one driving the funding in, right? Yet you have tech debt you have to address, you have app rationalization you have to address. I think there's an opportunity to link green ops, to say, here's the cost of what you're doing today versus what you could do. And by that architectural design of doing it the right way, here are the cost savings, right? And as soon as people hear cost savings, by reusing chipsets or reusing parts of technology versus them going, being shipped overseas and being broken down, and Lord knows what happens to that waste. There is an opportunity to say, hey, circular economy, here's a value, and here's a value to your OPEX by doing things differently, right? Your OPEX is going to reduce, you're meeting your sustainability measures. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think companies are starting to figure that out. They're probably also, and this is just subjective, right? I think everybody's worried about what's going to happen in January with the tariffs. And if you are saying, hey, I'm dependent on those new chipsets and they're not going to be available, but I need to launch software, or I need to launch something, how to do it. Now, I know Microsoft has always said they're very focused on sustainability, and so I give them kudos, right? That they figured out a way to refactor existing chipsets to run a new operating system versus, there's a lot of e-waste in the world, right? And people kind of always want that new versus, hey, what can we reuse or actually, strip computers and give them to, third world countries that don't have computers, right? Like we have to think differently
And I
about
think,
our
Lisa,
economy.
we don't even have to look at third world countries. I think there's the digitally, like there's the people in our own societies
Digital
that,
inequity, absolutely, which is one
yeah,
of the pillars that you have to report out on for the UN, right? If you're building software for net new, you have to make sure that that is available. I used to say with some of the architectural decisions that you had to go to the lowest common denominator in solving the solution
yeah,
versus the top one, right? Because you have to accommodate a certain level of population and how you're building things and their access to
yeah.
it and their availability to use it, which is one of the UN 17 goals and tenets.
So, Lisa, what can somebody do? Say they're an executive or they want to understand the United Nations ESG guidelines better, and they really want to know what's the next step. Is there any way they can connect with like-minded people in this area or people that can give them advice and help share a future direction with them and guide them?
Yeah, definitely. So we have stood up a community of thought leaders. It is a sister to CAF, and it is an open community. So not just for chief architects, but if you are an IT leader out in the industry interested in sustainability or responsible AI, or you're in an organization that actually is trying to implement or has implemented on its missions, you can log on, go out to our website, www.sustainablearchitectures.org. I think, Brice, we're now up to about 25 members in the community. Some are doing it and sharing their principles and practices. Others are doing research and white papers. We meet every 2 weeks, the second and third Thursday of every month. If you go out and register, you will automatically get a link into our team site where you can post stuff, you can contribute research. And we started last week, we are going to have thought leaders that are already working in this space come in and give presentations on what they're doing with respect to sustainability and responsible AI specific to IT and technology. So welcome anybody interested or that has a passion for saving the earth to come join us and be part of a great growing community at this point.